The 10 toughest actors in Hollywood history. The 10 toughest actors in Hollywood history. Some men just played tough, but these actors were tough, on screen and in real life. Their grit wasn't a performance, it was carved from real scars, street fights, prison cells, battlefields, and death-defying stunts. These weren't roles, they were reflections of lives lived on the edge. In this countdown, we're looking at the 10 actors who embodied toughness not because a script demanded it, but because survival had already written their story. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, which classic Hollywood star would you never want to face in a real fight? Careful, by the end of this video, your answer might change. Some of these men carried war medals, others carried criminal records, but every single one carried an authenticity that burned through the screen. Let's begin with a man whose entire life wasn't just a career, it was a masterclass in raw survival. Robert Mitchum. Robert Mitchum's story didn't start in Hollywood, it started in the dirt. At just 16, he was locked up on a Georgia chain gang. During the Depression, he rode freight trains like a ghost across America, fighting under fake names just to earn enough for a hot meal. That heavy-lidded stare. It wasn't a performance, it was a warning. The scarred face, the broken nose, every mark was real, carved by a life on the edge long before the cameras found him. Mitchum dug ditches, shoveled coal, and took any brutal job that kept him alive. By the time he stepped onto a movie set, he had lived a dozen lives already. Even prison time followed him into fame. In 1948, when he was busted for marijuana, it should have ended everything. Instead, Mitchum did his 60 days, walked out whistling, and somehow came back bigger than ever. He didn't apologize, didn't explain. He just kept working, as if nothing could touch him. On screen, he looked like a man who didn't give a damn, because off-screen, he truly didn't. Asked once about his acting technique, Mitchum smirked, "I have two styles, with and without a horse." Translation: he wasn't pretending. He was the thing everyone else tried to imitate. Co-stars said he was unsettling, not because he was loud, but because he was quiet. He carried the calm of a man who had already survived real fights and didn't need to prove a thing. Director Edward Dmytryk once confessed, "You didn't direct Mitchum. You just kept the camera rolling and prayed he didn't knock somebody out." Mitchum never strutted, never posed. He just stood there, and you felt it. He was living proof that the most dangerous man in the room is usually the one who doesn't have to say a word. Charles Bronson. Charles Bronson wasn't acting when he was silent. He was warning you. Born into suffocating poverty in a Pennsylvania mining town, one of 15 children crammed into a family that had nothing, he was sent underground at the age of 10. While other kids carried schoolbooks, he carried a pickaxe, breaking his back hundreds of feet below the earth, his face blackened with coal dust. That soot didn't just stain his skin, it burned itself into his soul. His childhood wasn't just hard. It was brutal. When World War II exploded, Bronson traded the darkness of the mines for the fire of the skies. As a tail gunner on B-29 raids over Japan, he stared death in the face on every mission. He was wounded in combat, awarded the Purple Heart, and came home with a soldier's scars, both visible and hidden. Survival meant hustling for whatever kept food on the table. Short order cook, onion picker, even a boxer for cash. Fame? That wasn't the goal. A paycheck was. Hollywood didn't discover an actor. It stumbled upon the real thing. Directors saw it instantly. His punches looked lethal because they were. Jan-Michael Vincent remembered filming The Mechanic. "He just grabbed my shirt, and I couldn't believe the strength." He wasn't pretending. When the Mafia allegedly sent threats after Death Wish, the studio offered him bodyguards. Bronson laughed. "I've lived too long, seen too much to be scared of that." What made Bronson unforgettable wasn't charm or ego, it was efficiency. He showed up, hit his marks, delivered his lines like steel, and walked away. No games. No Hollywood flash. Just raw presence, forged by a life where survival came first. Bronson didn't wear costumes. He didn't play roles. He was the role. And every time he walked on screen, you felt it. John Wayne. John Wayne. Broken ribs on set. A lung removed. Stomach cancer traced back to radiation exposure. Wayne wasn't just playing tough guys on screen, he was living through battles that would have broken most men. Before the cowboy hat and the iconic drawl, Wayne came from the hardscrabble of early 20th century rural America. He wasn't handed fame, he clawed his way there. At USC, he earned his football scholarship not through privilege, but through sweat, muscle, and unshakable grit. And when he first stepped into Hollywood, it wasn't under the lights, it was behind the scenes, hauling props, building sets, taking the back-breaking jobs nobody else wanted. That toughness became his signature. During the Alamo, he cracked several ribs in a brutal horse stunt. Instead of shutting down production, Wayne strapped his torso, swallowed painkillers, and kept riding. No complaints. No excuses. Just raw determination. Then came 1964. Cancer. Doctors cut out a lung and 4 ribs. For most actors, that would have been the end. Not John Wayne. Just months later, he was back on set, doing his own stunts in The Sons of Katie Elder as if nothing had happened. His resilience bordered on myth. But perhaps the most haunting chapter was The Conqueror. The film was shot downwind of a Nevada nuclear test site. Radiation seeped into the soil, the air, the crew's very bodies. Of the 220 cast and crew, nearly half would develop cancer, including Wayne himself. Years later, he would die of stomach cancer, almost certainly poisoned by that set. Yet he never slowed, never complained, never surrendered to weakness. When director Henry Hathaway tried to spare him with a stunt double after surgery, Wayne fixed him with that famous glare and said, "Either I do my own stunts, or you get someone else." That wasn't a script. That was John Wayne, unyielding, uncompromising, authentic to the bone. Even those who clashed with him politically respected the man's courage. Kirk Douglas once said, "Disagree with his views all you want, but don't ever question his toughness." I've seen him work through things that would send most men straight to the hospital. Wayne's life wasn't just about playing heroes. He was one, fighting through pain, defying death, and leaving behind a legacy built not on ease, but on sheer endurance. James Cagney. James Cagney, the scrappy street fighter from Manhattan's unforgiving Lower East Side. At just 5 feet 5 inches, this former boxer didn't need towering height to command a room. He carried explosive power in every movement. Growing up in one of New York's toughest neighborhoods, Cagney learned fast that survival wasn't a game, it was a fight. He didn't step into the ring for sport. He fought because if he didn't, bigger boys would crush him. Those bruising lessons etched into his body a raw instinct no acting school could ever replicate. That's why his screen presence felt so real. His punches weren't clumsy stage swings, they cracked like lightning, sharp and precise, the strikes of someone who had thrown plenty of real ones. Director Raoul Walsh once confirmed it, "Jimmy knew how to throw a punch better than any actor I ever worked with, because he'd been in the real fights." But Cagney's secret weapon wasn't just his fists. It was rhythm. Years of professional dance training gave him precision, balance, and timing. That rare blend, the fury of a fighter fused with the elegance of a dancer, made him lethal both on screen and off. He could choreograph violence with grace, delivering blows that looked beautiful and dangerous all at once. Off camera, his reputation was built not on size but on danger. Bob Hope joked, "Cagney was the kind of guy who'd knock you down, then pick you up and buy you a drink." Age never dulled that edge. It simply sharpened into a quieter, deadlier control. James Cagney proved a truth too often forgotten. Toughness isn't measured in size or noise. It's in coiled precision, in the certainty of every move. Or, as he once put it himself, "I was only competing with myself, and I thank you very much for letting me win that fight." Anthony Quinn. Anthony Quinn wasn't just an actor who played strong men, he was one. Born in the chaos of the Mexican Revolution, his earliest memories weren't of childhood games but of dodging bullets and watching soldiers storm through the streets. When his family fled to America, they landed in the slums of East Los Angeles, where survival was earned, not promised. By the age of 9, Quinn was already grinding as a butcher's helper, a laborer, a construction hand. When money ran dry, he stepped into the boxing ring, not for sport, but for survival. Every punch was real, every bruise was earned, and that famously broken nose? He didn't get it from makeup, it was carved into him by life itself. His physical strength became legendary on film sets. On Zorba the Greek, when 2 men were needed to haul massive logs across the beach, Quinn carried them alone. No showmanship, just sheer necessity. At 46, during the Guns of Navarone, he scaled cliffs himself, waving off insurance warnings as if danger were an old friend. Yet what set Quinn apart wasn't just brute power, it was his ability to balance strength with vulnerability. He could bare his soul, shed tears on screen, and still convince you he could crush any man who crossed him. That mix of toughness and tenderness didn't come from acting lessons. It came from scars, sweat, and survival. Directors trusted it. Co-stars felt it. Audiences believed it instantly. Anthony Quinn never needed to prove he was tough. He simply was. Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas was the very definition of grit. A wrestling scholarship champion, a Navy combat veteran, and a man who somehow cheated death more than once. At 72, he walked away from a helicopter crash that killed 2 others. Later, he fought back from a stroke so severe it should have silenced him forever. But nothing, absolutely nothing, ever kept Douglas down. Born to impoverished immigrant parents, he knew hunger before he knew hope. As a boy, he hustled odd jobs just to keep food on the table. Poverty didn't weaken him, it hammered him into steel. Wrestling gave him his first way out, not the flashy kind, but the grueling, bone-crunching world of collegiate wrestling, where survival was earned one painful match at a time. When World War II came, Douglas enlisted in the Navy, serving aboard submarine chasers, tiny, exposed ships constantly stalked by torpedoes. He was injured in action and medically discharged in 1944. Lesser men might have leaned on that. Douglas never did. On screen, his performances weren't acting. They were battles. He attacked every role with the same ferocity he brought to life. For Spartacus, he trained with real fighters, refused stunt doubles, and took the hits himself, because authenticity mattered more than comfort. Even when a brutal on-set fall nearly crippled him, he returned in just 2 days. But his greatest test came later in life. Surviving that helicopter crash was only the beginning. When a massive stroke stole his speech, many thought he was finished. Instead, Douglas clawed his way back through years of punishing therapy, relearning words one painful syllable at a time. He didn't just speak again, he wrote a book about the journey, turning his struggle into strength for millions. Director Stanley Kubrick once said, "When Kirk decided something was going to happen, it happened." That wasn't hyperbole. That was Kirk Douglas. Not movie magic, just pure, relentless willpower. A man who proved that true toughness isn't measured in youth or muscle, but in resilience that refuses to die. Lee Marvin. Lee Marvin wasn't just another Hollywood tough guy, he was the real thing. A Marine Corps combat veteran, a Purple Heart recipient, and a man who had literally taken machine gun fire through his back and lived to tell the tale. That quiet, dangerous energy he carried on screen wasn't acting, it was memory. Long before the cameras ever found him, Marvin had stared into the raw face of war. As a young Marine in the Pacific during World War II, he fought through some of the most savage island campaigns. At Saipan, a burst of machine gun fire tore through him, severing his sciatic nerve and leaving him with a limp he masked on screen for decades. While other actors studied how to look lethal, Marvin had already seen death up close. He knew violence wasn't flashy, it was sudden, brutal, and final. Directors noticed it immediately. He moved differently than other actors. Efficient, precise, no wasted energy, like a man who understood that real killing is never theatrical. It's survival. That authenticity made his performances unforgettable. When he played hitmen, soldiers, or criminals, there was something chilling in his eyes. He wasn't pretending to be dangerous, he was dangerous. The legends followed him off set. During location shooting in Oregon, he brawled with a group of lumberjacks in a bar. Witnesses swore he fought off several men, only to show up the next morning, bruised, battered, but refusing to delay filming. Co-stars admitted they were intimidated by him, not because he was loud or aggressive, but because he wasn't. His power came from absolute stillness, a quiet confidence that needed no performance. Lee Marvin didn't have to act tough. He carried the battlefield with him, tucked beneath his wardrobe, hidden in his scars. On screen, he showed audiences what real danger looked like, without ever raising his voice. Steve McQueen. Steve McQueen wasn't just Hollywood's king of cool, he was the real deal. A man who lived on the edge, who defied danger not for the cameras but because it was wired into his very soul. Abandoned by both parents, raised in reform schools, and hardened by the streets, McQueen's childhood was survival training in its rawest form. By 14 he had run away. By 17 he was in the Marines, where his defiance burned brighter than any discipline. He was demoted 7 times, thrown in the brig for 41 days. Not because he was weak, but because he refused to bow to authority. Yet when it mattered most, his courage was undeniable. During Arctic training, a tank sank beneath the ice, trapping 5 Marines. McQueen didn't hesitate. He dove into freezing waters and dragged them out one by one, risking his own life without a second thought. That was Steve, reckless when it came to rules, unshakable when it came to saving lives. Hollywood thought it could tame him. Instead, he brought his fearless streak with him. McQueen performed almost all his own stunts, terrifying producers, defying insurance companies. On The Great Escape, the only stunt he didn't perform was the motorcycle fence jump, because the studio physically stopped him. On the sand pebbles, he nearly drowned. On the towering inferno, he marched into flames so real even stuntmen backed away. Off-screen, he was just as unstoppable. He didn't play at racing, he lived it. McQueen competed in brutal professional races, sometimes under fake names so studios couldn't intervene. At the grueling 1970 Sebring 12 Hours, he finished 2nd overall, while wearing a cast on his broken foot. And when he learned Charles Manson had put him on a hit list, McQueen didn't hide behind bodyguards. He simply tucked a loaded Magnum into his waistband and kept moving. His longtime stunt double said it best, "Steve didn't act like a racer or a fighter, he was better than most professionals I knew." McQueen wasn't pretending to be fearless. He was fearless. Every day, every stunt, every race, every fight against the odds, he lived with the throttle wide open until the very end. Charlton Heston. Charlton Heston was more than a Hollywood legend. He was a warrior of endurance, a man who carried real scars into roles that demanded superhuman strength. Before he ever raised the staff as Moses or thundered across the screen in Ben-Hur, Heston served as a radio operator and aerial gunner in the Army Air Forces during World War II. Though he wasn't in the trenches, the military discipline and resilience forged in those years shaped every performance that followed. What set Heston apart wasn't just his towering frame, it was his iron refusal to take shortcuts. He rejected special treatment, throwing himself into punishing scenes that would have sidelined most actors. On the 10 Commandments, he hoisted heavy stone tablets take after take, the weight tearing at his shoulders, yet he never once asked for lighter props. During The Greatest Story Ever Told, he ripped shoulder ligaments mid-stunt, had it wrapped during lunch, and was back on set that same afternoon. His most haunting test of endurance came after filming The Conqueror near a nuclear test site in Utah. Nearly half the cast and crew would later develop cancer, including Heston. Even after surgery to remove a lung, he kept working, performing grueling, physical roles that would have drained men half his age. What drove him wasn't ego, but duty, a duty to his craft, to the story, and to the audience. Whether portraying prophets or warriors, Charlton Heston didn't just act strength, he lived it. Through his military service, raw physical power, and an unflinching will to suffer for the sake of art, he embodied endurance in its purest form. As he once humbly reflected, "It isn't just my story. It's the story of the 3rd Infantry Division and the men who served with me." Audie Murphy. Audie Murphy wasn't just a soldier, he was the very definition of courage carved into flesh and bone. The most decorated combat soldier in American history, he personally killed over 240 enemy soldiers, earning the Medal of Honor and every other U.S. medal for valor before most men his age had even found their footing in life. And yet, if toughness had a face, it wouldn't be scarred or intimidating. It would look like Audie Murphy, boyish, modest, and disarmingly unthreatening. At just 19 years old, Murphy climbed onto a burning tank destroyer and single-handedly held off an entire company of German soldiers for more than an hour. Wounded, nearly out of ammunition, he somehow rallied a counterattack that drove the enemy back. That one act won him the Medal of Honor. But it was only one chapter in a story almost too heroic to believe. By his 21st birthday, Murphy had earned 28 medals and decorations, destroyed tanks, stormed machine gun nests, and kept fighting when most men would have fallen. Military historians say he killed more men than some entire units. What made him truly chilling was not his record, but his appearance. Standing 5 feet 5 inches and weighing barely 112 pounds, he looked more like a schoolboy than a legend of war. When Hollywood discovered him on the cover of Life magazine, studio guards refused to believe this gentle-looking kid was the same man whose name terrified German veterans. The disconnect was haunting. Innocence on the outside, absolute lethality within. Even when he played himself into hell and back, producers had to tone down his real deeds, because audiences simply wouldn't believe what he had truly done. But the war never left him. Behind his calm smile, Murphy wrestled with crushing PTSD. He slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow, endured violent flashbacks, and frightened even those closest to him. His wife admitted, during those episodes, it wasn't Audie anymore, it was someone I didn't recognize. And yet, even in civilian life, that same lethal switch remained. Once, during an argument with a businessman, Murphy changed in an instant. Witnesses said the man froze, realizing in that moment that this quiet war hero could kill without hesitation. Murphy never set out to be Hollywood's war hero. He would have chosen light-hearted comedies or dusty westerns any day. But every time he stepped in front of the camera, there was something undeniable about him. A stillness, a weight, that silently declared, "This man has seen things you can't imagine, and somehow lived to tell it." He didn't need to act tough. He was tough. The realest thing Hollywood ever put on screen. One day a guy asked me, "Hey, you want to be in this movie?" I said, "What do I gotta do?" He goes, "Do you want to be an extra?" I told him, "Extra what?" And speaking of toughness, an honorable mention goes to Danny Trejo, the modern warrior. Before his scarred face became unforgettable in films like Machete and Heat, Trejo was fighting for his life in California's hardest prisons. He wasn't in protective custody. He was in San Quentin's general population during its most violent years, where he became lightweight and welterweight boxing champion, squaring off against the meanest inmates alive. Those scars you see, they're not makeup. They're souvenirs from knife fights and prison yard battles that nearly killed him more than once. But what makes Trejo's story legendary is not just survival, it's transformation. He got sober behind bars and has stayed clean for over 50 years, dedicating his life to helping others do the same. Hollywood didn't discover him because he wanted fame. He was simply on set helping a young actor through addiction. That's when his presence spoke louder than any audition. Unlike studio-manufactured tough guys, Trejo doesn't need to brag. Asked once about stunts, he said, "I'm 75. I don't want to be 76 trying to act like I'm 35. Actors get hurt. Stuntmen don't." That's the voice of a man who's been through hell and doesn't have to prove a damn thing to anyone. Among real criminals and ex-cons, his respect is unquestioned. As one former inmate put it, "In places where fake toughness gets you killed, Danny's the real deal." Everybody knows it. So there you have it, the 10 toughest actors in Hollywood history. Not men who just played strong, but men who lived it. They carried real scars, hard-earned resilience, and the kind of courage no acting class could ever teach. Their legends endure not because of scripts or publicity, but because the camera caught something no stunt double or studio trick could fake: authenticity. Which one shocked you most? Would you rank them differently? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. And remember, before Hollywood manufactured toughness, there were men who'd already proven it on Depression-era streets, World War battlefields, and prison yards. Subscribe for more untold stories from cinema's golden age.